called Archives d'Architecture Moderne, which you may know about in the sense that it has brought to the AAA, for instance, a lot of those exhibitions of Belgian architecture, the Pomp exhibition, Antoine Pomp exhibition, the De Tonic exhibition, the exhibition Brussels, Capital of the Art Nouveau, and so on. And I think at any one time, from my knowledge of him for the last 4 years or so, he's always got about 3 exhibitions on the go at any moment. And not only the exhibitions, but the catalogues that he produces for them, as some of you may know, are impeccable and embarrassingly good for the sort of scruffy English who are so bad at producing these things. But that is just one of his multifarious activities. Simultaneously with that, which seems to get more and more and more, so that now he's doing such exhibitions from Paris as well as from Brussels and so on. But he has a group of people which is called ARAU. And he will explain all of this afternoon, but as I understand it, it is a group of activists who concern themselves with the rights and the wrongs of proposals made for the city of Brussels. And he has personally managed to prevent some of the nastiest things happening in Brussels. Some of the actions that they've taken have been very successful indeed. And not just in a negative sense, but always the group is prepared also to propose what could happen. So it's not just a kind of negative action, but it's also a positive action. And then linked to the activities of ARAU are his activities as a teacher at the school of La Combe in Brussels, where he, I think, probably more than any of the other people at La Combe, has built up a young group of students and ex-students now who produce quite amazing projects, which I think in the context of Belgian or French architectural education stick out a mile. And inevitably there has become, in the last 2 or 3 years, a strange sort of underground connection between some of these people and inevitably some of the people working out of Bedford Square. So here you have this sort of polyglot personality, Maurice Culot, who's very modest and would deny most of the things I've just mentioned, actually throwing all these balls into the air simultaneously. And when you go to Brussels, he's constantly sort of rushing between one situation and another. Now sometimes, characteristically, I present him with the problem that we want him to come and speak today, and tomorrow afternoon he gets on a plane and is there for a meeting at, I don't know, 8 o'clock in the evening, and then we'll have another 3 balls in the air by Friday. We've grabbed him briefly and given him this impossible task of trying to relate all of these activities together. Maurice.
Well, hello. One, I must apologize for my poor English. I am not a polyglot as Peter Cook, so of me with a lot of attention, please. And second, Peter Cook was speaking about activists. Well, we have to be very cautious because the term activist was in Belgium during the Second World War a very bad term because activists were people who were collaborating, so I'm not an activist. And, well, this is a historical fact. I would like to give you today some slides of the recent work we have done in Brussels. And this work is dealing with 3 phases of our activities. Did you help me with this thing? Yes, is that all right? Yeah? And as a member of the group ARAU, ARAU means, I will try to translate it, Workshop for Urban Action and Research. Is that clear? And ARAU is a group of people, about let's say 20 people, and very few architects. I think there are only 2 architects in that group, and it's a group of people mainly from the left party, socialist or communist, or people without any political acquaintance. And this group has a definition of city planning and the city. The group believes that the liberation of the people, of the inhabitants, will be made in the city and not in the, what you call that, it's not the country, but you know, the sprawl around the city. And we believe in the city for the liberation of the people, and we believe that the city is a place where the people could take the power. So we have developed in the group ARAU a strategy concerning the city and the planification of the city. It's a very simple strategy because as most of the people are not architects, we express ourselves in a very simple manner. And I will tell you some of the few regulations of the group as ARAU. We believe that each project that put people in the city, it's a good project. And every project, let's say freeway or business office, that ejects people from the city is a bad project. That is the first regulation of the group. Second one, by example, is that the urban continuity, that means building going around street, is a very good thing, and we do not believe in a building put as a block, you know, a lot of block with green space around them, and so on. But we have very simple grid to analyze what is a socialist city, and we have two way of working. One way is to publish, by the way of the press, the alternative planning. The thing go like this. We heard about a project, let's say a bank will intend to build in the center of the city a huge bank office, destroying a lot of habitation or some other project of this kind. So we publish a project of the bank in the press by way of press meeting. And after that we publish a counter project showing that in place of a bank you could put inhabitants, you could put other things in an economical way of thinking. We do not propose to put a green space where it's impossible to put it. So this is the way we are acting, this kind of group. And we try to, if we have an image of the city and we try to show this image of the city in front of the public, we try also to democratize the decision, because we believe the problem of planning is not a problem of a good planning or bad planning. It's a problem to have a planning with more democratization in the decision. And in fact, we don't care if the plans in reality are bad or good. We believe that the plan has to be, the decision has to be done in a way more democratic. So this one facet of the activity I'm doing as an architect. And the other facet is as a teacher in the school of Lacan, the school that was founded in the year 28 by Van der Velde, the former architect of the Weimar School. And the school until the year 60 was a school, as many schools, very functionalist in the approach of the problem. And starting in the year 70, we tried to force the students of the school, let's say part of the students of the school, they spend 5 years to study, to become an architect. So we say, you spend some year in a school and the government pay for your study, you have to feedback the society, and we ask to our students to elaborate a counter project for the committee of inhabitants. This was not easy to do, because you know that in each school you have more conservative teachers and so on, and they don't want the students deal with actual problems or polemical problems. The third activity is the one I have as a director of an association. It's called Archives of Modern Architecture. It was founded in the 68, and we intend to create some kind of a museum of architecture of the 19th and 20th century, because we know that all the planning of architects, let's say architects that are now 80 years old or are dead a few years ago, were going through the garbage because people don't want to keep the plan, because nobody wants to do with old plan. So we try to keep the plan, to start some kind of a museum. And so I'm dealing with these three activities. One is purely historical, is to keep plan, make exhibition about them, as we are doing now about Sauvage in France. We have an exhibition opening in Paris in October, as well on Godin, the founder of the Famille of Guise. And so this historical way we are doing. This is very necessary to us to do that, because as we are making a lot of controversy on city planning, it's good to have some kind of historical or cultural background in front of the authorities. So we deal very often, we have 3 or 4 ads, and we are speaking in a different way if we are in front of different interlocutors. And I will show you today some projects that are different in their approach. And the first one, I hope it is on. This is not a small town in Belgium, as you can see. It is, this is the true face of Saint-Tropez in France. And this is the fake one, it's Port Grimaud by architect Poet. And I show you this slide because when we start our action in Brussels, in the group ARAU or even in the school, we believe in modern architecture. And we try to furnish alternatives that were modern in their image, you know, with, let's say, the thing, you know, what an image could be modern for architects and people. And as we were working, we finally found that the modernistic image was a very bourgeois one. A lot of architects hide themselves behind the modern face of architecture and use this image to say, well, we are neutral, we are not doing a political thing, and why not to use modern form and so on. And after some years, we find that people don't like very much modern architecture, but not only for aesthetic reasons, because if you build a very large block of apartment, by example, you have to destroy a very large piece of land with houses and so on. And when you know that the money of the country for social housing is not coming too well because if the government has problems, they first cut in the program of social housing and so on. We try to mix the aesthetic reflection and the one on economic and social problems. And we find that if you are working in an existing city, one of the best ways to assure habitation to the people is not to destroy everything, but it is to going by very small piece. A book is, a few years ago in London was published a book called Small is Beautiful, and we think in fact that the youth project are project of yesterday, and the project of tomorrow will be very small project at a very small scale, because it's the problem, I suppose they are the same in London than in Brussels, are not problems for the rich people, but problems for the poor people to find housing at a good price and so on, and to avoid the decay of the city. So thinking that way, we finally, if a group of, as ARAU, never speak about aesthetic, but only about functionment of the city, about organization of the city, finally today we have to deal with the aesthetic of the city. And against the will of the architect, of the Association of Architects, in fact we try to develop an aesthetic of all the forms, not of new forms. I speak here in the name of the group of ARAU. And we look around us and we say, well, Port Grimaud is a very good imitation of Saint-Tropez. It's very good because it's very cheap. They sell the house at a very high price, but to do it is very cheap because they build houses in wall in concrete and just put the same house as they paint in pink or in white or in blue. but it's a very cheap way to do building. Of course, in that place you have water and so on. The situation is different than we have in Belgium or in London. But we say it is something to learn about cities as Port-Grimaud. People that have money love it, and they don't go in the rabbit cage that we do for the poor people. So we try to look at this kind of architecture, and we say, why not use this model for our planning? And I will show you, this is a preview because the meeting with the press will be held only on the 15th of July. The last project made by the group ARAU. No, it's on this side. There's few things. It's more than that. Let's see, we go back. This one. This one, I think. Maybe. This is a view of the center of the city of Brussels. This view was taken in 1910. I was not there, but it's in the old postcard. And this view is a new one. And, well, I only take these two views of the center of Brussels because they resume all the situation in the center of the city. Office block, take place of housing. Railway going to the north, to the south, has destroyed almost all the center of the city to make the junction between two stations. And on the land that was free for the railroad station, they built office block and parking lot. And now in the center of the city of Brussels, oh, okay, thank you. You have now in the city of Brussels a huge parking lot that is going that way in front of this building. And the first thought of the city was to put there a garden on beton, on a concrete surface. And we say, no, this is not possible. You have the population of the city, of the center of Brussels, was at the beginning of the century of, let me say in English, 150,000 people that time. Let's say, well, I suppose it's high. Now the population of the city is only 40,000 people. That means a decline of population of about more than half of what was living in the city at the beginning of the century. So we say in the center of the city you have to put people, and you will put some garden too, but put habitation and stuff for the people living in the city. So we will present to the press. No, this is again that one. Well, I show you here because this is what an old church in Brussels called Le Brigittine. They destroy everything around the church, and a few years ago they proposed to rebuild an old house around the church. And we say, well, you propose to rebuild an old house around the church because you feel that you have done something wrong, building now a new building behind the church. And we say, why not take this kind of thinking for the whole city, because behind the facade, all the flats are the same. And now we know that today you could do any facade you want for the same price. And we say, if you look again at Port-Grimaud, you will see some kind of a flat, very cheap flat. They sell there at the high price, but they are very cheap to done. And we say, we will do that. We want to do that in place of modern building. And that's this one. And this is the plan we will propose to the press in around 7 days. And this is the church you have seen before is there. The building you have seen on the photograph is here. And actually all this is empty. It's a parking lot. And we say we don't want a garden in this place, but we want a building for inhabitants. A third of this building must be given to social housing. And we say at when you go from the Grand Place of Brussels, which is there, this very historical place, built at, you could build at on this way, building from housing also, but using an aesthetic that will be acceptable for everybody in the city. So this was, you could see on this picture. This is the same house you have seen on the photographs before. That was again the Jesuit church. We replaced it here, making a new building in, let's say, a style that could be looking old for some people. And we put on this planning around 1,500 people. So we say that's a good planning, and we have done this planning in this way that to have the population with us, because we are very demagogic, as you could see. And these are details, and again, when we are thinking this kind of project, our model of reference is not modern city planning, but copies of old city planning as Port Grimaud, but we do it knowing that in Port Grimaud it's a speculation affair, but we say that we could bring some of the aesthetic of this speculation affair in our new program. We use this to explain how we use this kind of drawing. We publish it in color in a lot of 10,000, that's right, 10,000, 10,000 probably, pieces, and we distribute them to the tourists at the Grand Place. We distribute them as the member of the press. We distribute them to the political men of different background and so on. And we try to make our ID going forward. But we are not selling plans. A group of ARAU is not a group of, it's not an architect office. We are never accepting some command or something like that. We just throw the planning to the public opinion, and after that we leave and say you will do it what you want with it, but we are not selling plans. And this is something else, and this project could never be defended by a group as ARAU. This was a project made in the school of Lacan. It is the same place, and you still have the church that is here, the Gothic church of Saint-Michel. And this was a project made by the student in third year in architecture this year, and he tried to put there a building of, not office building, but inhabitants building on the site. And he did, in fact, he said, well, we put in front of the old church, put a new building, and do it as a modern tower, but for inhabitants. And we accept in the school, in fact, that we go with this scheme, but we know that it's not a scheme that we could use in front of the public opinion, because you could do the most beautiful tower you could think as an architect. It's impossible to convince the public opinion that to build a tower in front of the old church is a good thing. But this was an exercise for the students, and as you see, he was influenced by the 5 American architects. You find here the influence of Meyer and so on. But anyway, it was an improving exercise for the students, because they could deal with some cultural background, where they have to read the 5 architects American and to develop some kind of a building with this floor, and maybe I could show the plan. This is the plan of the door. The idea was to have a floor and a free planning going on the floor, making shadows, in fact, on the outside, to give to the tower an aspect that could fit with the old tower of the church. The tower was supported by 4 columns with the pipe and so on, and rest on a free rez-de-chaussée, a mixture between the influence of Le Corbusier and 5 architects at London. I get no time to have a picture of this project, but the idea was the following. As the city of Brussels and other cities in Belgium were since the Second War destroyed by a lot of projects made by speculators and so on. Now the public opinion intend to defend any kind of building. If they are 50 years old, they are good because they are old. And we say, all right, because the problem is now to fix the structure of the city. And this building, which was made in 1873, and a floor added in the year 20s, the peoples of this street obtained that this building will be conserved, and the other one, the same one, that it is on the other front of the street. And they developed in the school a project showing that it is possible to conserve the facade and to put apartments behind the facade. And this demonstration was made in the school, and the Minister of Lodgement invited to the jury, and so he could see the demonstration of that it is possible to conserve the facade and put apartment behind it. This is a view, on the only picture here, showing the use of the facade. This is a view taken on the rear of this building, and the idea was to have an inner court, showing part of the old facade, but the inside of it, the outside is here, and the apartments are on this way, on this side. This is another project. As you have in London, you have a lot of barracks in the center of the city. These barracks were made in the 19th century. And today, all these barracks are empty, and the Minister of the Foreign Affairs of the Army, want to sell it. And the population of Brussels, I say, we want this barrack for social housing. And the pressure was so high that it was accepted. And now all the barracks in the center of the city will be transformed in social housing. In fact, we will destroy all the old buildings because it's impossible to keep them, because they are too old, because they are too high, because it's impossible to have a new building in this kind of planning. So, again, we try to furnish alternative planning for this huge seat in the center of the city. And we want to do it because if nobody shows that you could do something else than putting blocks, let's say 4 blocks on this seat, they will go again and do it as they've done since the 30s. They will build blocks of apartments like that with green space between the apartments blocks. So in this case, again, we look on the old example and we choose. We could choose any kind of example. Let's say the city of Prague in Czechoslovakia, or we choose by hasard the city of Honfleur in France. And we start looking at the facade of the city and we say, well, we could imagine a planning for social housing which will find its inspiration in the planning of Honfleur. Why Honfleur? Because also we have a canal. You see a canal here. It's a very dirty canal, but it exists, so you could use it as a presence of the water in the center of the city. And this is a close view of the facade of Honfleur. And I'm sorry for the full picture, but it was not finished. The idea, you see the same, maybe I could put it back here. This is the side, and these are existing houses. You saw them here around the old barracks. And we project to plan. We have made different solutions for this implanting, but to give a piece of water here in the center, looking more or less as a canal. And this could be done because the budget for the aménagement of the ground is not the same as the one for the apartment. So we could raise a little bit more money to no, the slide is not too good. Yes, thank you. So you see the idea is to build here some kind of canal with fresh water and clean water, and to put houses around this canal. But these houses will be built in concrete and not in bricks, but they will have the aspect of the one of Honfleur in France, using a lot of gimmicks that they've done in this city, using the tile in the facade and so on. And the advantage of this kind of planning is that we could divide the site and give a piece to different architects. Because if you don't do it, if you put blocks like that, you have to give all the project to the same architect. And we believe that it's no good because it makes monopoles for the architect, but also for the builders. You could only find a kind of builders and so on. So this scheme with the different facades could be built by let's say 2 pieces and after 3 pieces and so on. And you could do it dealing with the time, because we never have the money to build everything in 1 year or 2 years. You have to make it, let's say, in 10 years or 6 years and so on. But you could do it gradually with this kind of planning. But as we are architects, we also think about how do you call it? You may call it modern architecture implantation, and we have done some sketch also that we will put in the final rapport in the site, showing that it's possible also to implant some kind of building with this heroic ears inspiration. And you see some the earth going through the building, and this is the building too, and the inside part. And this slide is upside down, so I will not speak about it. But some schemes are treated in a different approach. This is a model for another part of the center of the city. And as you could see on the model, this is a building. It's pure building of speculation, because the city of Brussels sells the ground, and the promoter could build on this ground anyone he wants, on the same block, the same thing. And we say that's enough. You couldn't go, if you let them go, they will build all this kind of building around the street. You have to stop it. And this project was compiling with the whole character of the street of Brussels, and mainly with this central boulevard that were inspired by the boulevard of Haussmann in Paris. And so we developed some kind of architecture of building with a galvanized roof, and with inside floor with apartments. And I don't know if you see from the picture. And dealing with all part of the city. This is a very old tower, and we keep it in the project, using the wall, the existing wall. Actually, this tower is included in a new building, in an old building, and it will appear at the end of this new part in the center of the city. This is a project, the same project on this block, with a pool and apartment flats on the top of the side of the pool on each side. And I will show this last project made this year in school, and it was about concerning the part of Brussels that is a very old part, the center of the city, a classical part, with palm and cut trees. And in the corner of the park, you found old buildings from the 18th centuries, with addition in the 19th century. This is a copy of the way that architects were building this kind of triad in the 18th century also, but this was built in 1913. And the problem of this project is that the city wants to destroy everything, and we say don't destroy it, you could use it for public space. And a theater director wanted to have new place for his theater, and we say we could find occupation for this kind of building, and also the next slide. And so some students, in fact, we have 6 different schemes. This one was the more architectural one because all schemes were underground, so nothing appeared in the surface. But this one proposed to rebuild the classical building. You have one existing here, and this facade, neoclassic, with a fronton, where you could project the announcement of the theater, what is playing, and with this is treated in pastiche architecture, corresponding to the one existing here, and this part is the room for spectacle, and in that place you have a glass with green going on the, what you call that, a screen. You have a screen in front of the facade, and you have in this part green going on each side, and this is to be seen from the street, and show also a fake fronton with 2 columns. In the park also the problem was to build a police station, because they wanted to have one in that place, and the idea was to build it with a classical facade, but to not finish it because the program was not enough to fill this classical building. So they just made the facade in front on the street, and the rest of the building was just left expecting maybe an addition. Other projects show the you find in old school today, Palladian influence in the building, but with a mistake, the stair was put in the corner of the building. And I think this is the old slide frame with me. Yes. You could put the light on, please. I hope that you understand my really poor English. Is that all right? Yes. I hope you appreciate it also. So you have seen some different pictures, and they all deal from old style to new style, you could say that. And but the meaning in the reason why we do that, in fact, is always the same, except maybe for the tower in front of this church. That was a speculation, a cultural speculation. The other project were all projects that could be used in a public way to show to people, to make a press meeting, and to give them as alternative planning. And we believe that we have done in Brussels some kind of a good job, because since the 70s, more 100 committee of inhabitants are born and are very strong, and now they are fighting, let's say, communal or national policy that intends to destroy the city. In fact, the problem in Brussels maybe is worse than in London, because, as you know, the country is divided between different people speaking different language. You have the Flemish one, the Walloon one who speaks French, and we have between the two, you have the people living in Brussels. And nobody loves them because it's a capital, so they are ugly people, the capitalists and so on. So they all try to struggle Brussels. And this political, this difficult political situation as, let's say, a benefit, is that the people now say that if they want to survive, if they want that, because the planning of the national planning for Brussels is clear, is to just go in the city with a lot of freeway. So no people, no problems. And against this way of thinking, the people of Brussels now say, well, we have to react, and is the way because there are no group in more than 100 committees of inhabitants. But this kind of committee, you couldn't expect from these people that they could understand speculation about architecture. It's impossible because if you speak about, let's say, I don't know what kind of speculation you could speak, conceptual architecture, let's say, it's impossible to explain that because it's a cultural affair. So it's why we are very empiric in our reaction. When we deal with the center of the city, we use a style that is that the people love, and it's very funny because if I am for the struggle of class, we have to use a strategy. And this strategy is, by example, this is just a phase of this strategy. With the drawing I show you first, in the center of the city, with this old building, very nicely done and so on. But people very conservative say, well, these people from ARAU are not so bad to see they are building their old building very nicely. And finally, we deal with, we try to deal, to go a little bit of way with people that we need to fight. If we present ourselves as radical communists and saying we want new structure for a new society, we will be pushed out by the population because they could not understand. And in fact, we believe that very often that architect and architecture is not very generous for the people because we intend to have our own image. This kind of example of image, this is not a critic about this image, but they try to make new models as a sculptor make a model or as a painter made a painting. But it's a game for themselves, and we believe that today it is not possible to try to impose to people, let's say, a kind of moral. If you read Le Corbusier, the first book of Le Corbusier is something astonishing because every word is linked with a moral appreciation. Le Corbusier said people don't go in the cafe, they play to football at the ground of my beautiful building. That's not true. People go to cafe, architects have mistress, they drink and so on. And so this is the society. And very often we try to impose some kind of image of the future. Architects love to draw planning for the future. The only thing we say is that the future will be probably the same as today. And the future, the year, let's say when we all in this room will be dead, they will still have very poor people and probably poor and poor people. And if you go on the moon, that means nothing. That means just a technological invention, but it's nothing. And the problem of tomorrow is to find new legislation to permit rehabilitation of all others, by example, is to assume more democracy in the decision. That means the problem of today for us, and when I say us, I speak about me, about the group of ARAU or my students in Lacan, is not a question of style, it's a question of participating by our poor means, in fact, because we are a minority, but to defend a certain image of democracy, but by using our professional capabilities. We don't, as we see, we are people, I must say, we are people from the left, but we use image. We are not discussing only, we discuss, but we are producing a lot of image because we believe that if you want that the people could have a choice, they must see different image with different motivation. And you have architecture that is motivated by capitalism, and you have architecture that is motivated by, let's say, it's shorted by socialism, let's say. And we pretend that the image you have seen of the old inner city reconstituted by the ARAU, it's a socialist image because the reflection behind him is a socialist one. And when I say socialist, I don't speak about a branch of the party, you know, it's a way of thinking. So I think I have tell what I could tell in English. And if you have some question, I would like to answer to them as I could. If some people are interested to have information about our action and to have it in pretty good English, I could give my address. Or we have a publication that was made in Holland on the group ARAU with an introduction and with all the projects we have done until 75. And this brochure is printed in English too. And if people are interested in what we are doing, also as a catalog and so on, we are publishing a monthly review giving information about not ARAU but the archive. As you see, we have many ads, you know. This is a historical one, this is a polemical one, and we have also a publication on different schemes as Brussels in the beginning of the century, history of the industrial landscape, and so on.
Bureaucracy for colonial reasons, but central bureaucracy. Now, I am not clear in relation, you must wear your ARAU hat now. I want to know why you think it good to increase the center city population of Brussels. Presumably, the major working activity in the centre of Brussels is office work. Now, people who work in offices are as humane and are subjected to the same tastes, weaknesses, and political appetites as anyone else. Now, why you were suggesting that there should be more accommodation in central Brussels and not in the suburbs. Now, with your ARAU hat on, what is the political benefit of that?
Political benefit of people living in the center of the city is to give power to them. Let's explain it. In Belgium, since the 19th century, at that time, at the end of the 19th century, the town were filled with people and in very poor condition of living. And the reflections of the tenants of power was, we have to be careful because such a population as we have in Belgium, a very populated country, if we don't care about the city will become socialist, it's a place of socialist explosions. Because at that time, the power in Belgium was a Catholic power, as it is still today. That means also, it's important to know, it's a power with a moralistic approach to the problem. The power in Belgium thinks of good or bad and so on in a very traditional way of thinking. And at that time, they don't imagine solution for the problem of the city. They say there is a problem in the city, so let favorize the departure of people in the country. Because in the country, it's more difficult to group yourself. It's more difficult to syndicate yourself if you have atomized on a very large land, because it's quite difficult. You know the expression in Paris, descendre dans la rue and go in the street. That is a meaning that people were living in the upper floor of the building were going in the street to manifest. If you live in a country, this became impossible. This was the first thinking of the people at the end of the 19th century. And if you go on, in the mid of the 20s in Belgium, the first step was to build garden cities. They built a lot of garden cities around Brussels. But they saw that these garden cities were becoming socialist also. So they say we will stop this politics of garden cities. Now the new politics, and they started in the 20s until now, they say we will encourage people because we believe that is a place where you could take the power, you could organize yourself and not that don't mean that we are again the village. Some people like to live in villages, but it is for us, it is the village or the city, but not the sport or the habitation. And also just to finish, this politics of putting all small houses around the center of office block means also that they will build a freeway because we have to go to work, small houses because it's expensive to have an underground, so they build freeway everywhere and so on. And in fact, what is this kind of politics, building freeway? It's the politics of the General Motors, it's the politics of building people selling cars and so on. And it is very difficult in a small country as Belgium that is dependent, for example, of the states, because we are too small. The pressure of the people building the freeway is enormous. They will build them anyway, anywhere, because they got machines, they got people, they have to do it. So now we are trying to stop this kind of machine and saying, in place of building freeway, try to rehabilitate and make rehabilitation of all buildings. And by example, if you know Brussels, the sidewalk in the city, they are impossible. You could risk your life walking on the sidewalk of Brussels because they prefer to make very huge freeway because this is good for engineers, you know, and made a freeway. But to make the reparation for sidewalk, we have about more than 1,000 kilometers of sidewalk to repair. Nobody wants to do it because it's not a very noble job, you know, to repair a sidewalk. So,
but that's it. You see, the danger which London has, the same as Brussels, the danger of encouraging people to live in the city is that they become dependent on central services such as dustmen, sidewalk repairers, bus drivers, milkmen, sewer cleaners. All these jobs are the lowest paid jobs. The city service jobs are always the lowest paid, and yet if you encourage people to live in the city, those are the sort of jobs you're creating. Indeed, they will probably have to fill those jobs themselves to make the city workable. And I find it a very, you see, it doesn't matter that half your people that you put back in the city are working for ITT, IBM, or EEC. I mean, I think it matters, but those are probably the jobs going in Brussels anyhow. But if you encourage more and more people to live in cities, centre city living is dependent on the service industries. And the service industries are the lowest paid industries, whether it's Bombay, New York, Brussels, or London. And they are dependent on them. And that is the labour force you'll then be creating, and that is the lowest paid labour force. That is the labour force that is always at the end of the queue. It isn't the miners. It isn't the telephonists at ITT. It isn't the airline pilots. It's the dustmen. It's the pavement repairers. It's the milk deliveries, it's the newspaper boy, it's the bus drivers, it's the tube train drivers, and if you put people in the centre city, they have got to have those services, and therefore you are encouraging that sort of job opportunity, which is the most exploited job opportunity of the whole range, even worse than agricultural workers. You see, I find it a very rum sort of socialist theory that you expound.
Let's say, again, you have to take them off anyway.
Pardon?
You have to take the garbage anyway within the country or the city. Pay the people more. So pay them more.
No, but the point is that, for instance, it's only the middle class who complain about the standard of waiters in restaurants. But it's only restaurants with waiters that you find in centre city. It's only the middle class who complain about dirt in the street. They complain about the dustmen. They don't complain about the people who litter the streets. They say, why aren't there more dustmen? Why aren't there more literate bus drivers so that they know where we're trying to get to, etc., etc. And if you encourage population in centre city, you encourage the bottom end of the scale of jobs, which are the service industries in the city. Well, it might not be entirely true.
much more services than the central city, which would have a complex mix.
Well, I'm sorry, mate. Look at the labour returns in London. No, you're absolutely wrong.
For 3 million people, which is 3 times bigger than it should be, you need many more services.
But this is what I'm saying. There are very few people in the suburbs who complain about holes in the pavement. But if you look in London, who makes the holes in the pavement? The Irish slave labour force. Who drives the buses? The black slave labour force. Who drives the tube trains? Nonsense, he was just talking about it being easier in the city. He actually said it's easier in the city because you don't need a car. There are subways and buses. Don't say I'm wrong, I'm quoting the speaker.
But you're arguing for a situation which everybody is self-contained with a car.
I'm not arguing for that at all. What I was arguing against was in...
That is what it seems to be to me.
Well, you're wrong.
Everyone should be
Well, you're wrong. Let me
with their
answer.
own garbage, their own personal services, their own sewage services, and have their own form of transport.
I'm taking up the speaker's points, which I felt at least were better argued and less loony than yours just made. However, what I was saying was that I didn't understand on his what I thought very humane social theorizing. I did not understand how that matched in with increasing centre city populations. That's all. I don't understand how it works out with school janitors. I don't understand how it works out with busmen. I don't even understand how it works out with late night security guards, of which you find far more in centre city than you do in the country or the suburbs. All the time it's creating jobs at the low end of the market. All the time.
But I think you are really talking about a situation which is American.
No, I'm talking about London.
But there is no culture of city in Europe.
I'm talking about London.
I'm not talking about London. If you go to Western Europe, there's a very deep-rooted culture, urban culture, which is now being eroded. The American city has never been a place of
I'm talking about the American city.
It is a place of privilege. That's why we want to keep it.
I'm not talking about the American city. What do you mean Vienna was never a place of privilege? Christ! 1911, it was the third most populous city in the world, Vienna, and that wasn't a city of privilege, and that's not in Western Europe, and that isn't a cultural centre then. Nonsense.
Against the rural situation, always a situation of privilege. That was quite different in America.
Maybe, mate. We talk about the cost. I'm not talking about American cities. I was trying to take Brussels.
And living in the highest populated areas in terms of affluence, you're exemplifying the situation that a socialist would want to get rid of, which is unequal opportunity, unequal pay. I'm not particularly a socialist myself, but I understand one of the socialist ideals is to actually have equal pay and idealistic. But that is a problem of non-consent. And you're exemplifying that situation if Cedric's argument. Would you agree with that, Cedric?
Yes. This isn't the problem, 19th century. You go on, I believe you're associated with the AA. Try Goodge Street and Mortimer Street on a Monday or Tuesday morning and see how many people have slept overnight on the pavement outside the Labour Exchange for catering jobs. And they weren't there 10 years ago. Well, what I'm saying is that my argument, it was a question, actually, and I wasn't really referring to America. Maybe time for that sometime. My question was, I didn't understand the logic of wanting, I'd like to get onto the architecture, in fact, but I didn't understand the logic of your group, I've forgotten now, what's it called? ARAU. There's an ARAU. I didn't understand the socialist logic of wanting to increase centre city population, where in fact, I assume London is loosely associated with Western Europe, where in fact any move that has been undertaken, and a prime example, of course, is the major housing schemes in the East End between 52 and 60. Those are now the people occupying those who could have gone to the new towns, except for a bit of boat rigorous social theory about living on your job. Those are now occupied by people, 90% of whom can't even pay their rent because their wages are so low. Those are the people that we grumble about on getting our buses late, on being black and not speaking English, or not getting the sewers working, etc., etc. We have created a fund, a whole... And I do not understand why you want to increase centre city population.
The East End is a suburb, it's not central city.
What?
East End is a suburb.
Mate, it's 5 minutes walk from the stock exchange. It's 5 minutes, Whitechapel is 5 minutes walk from the stock exchange. Now, if that isn't central city, what
You
is?
could put in the center of the city only office block or only apartment block.
Never mind what we put there, we might not put anything there. Why are you putting housing
You
there?
have people to clean the city. You could do anything you want. You have the Chinese solution. You and me, architects, spend 2 days a week and we clean the city. They are poor, but we are not in China. So the problem is not to the living. You have a lot of people driving bus, being black, Jewish, and so on. And these people are there. You could erase them on the map. You could tell, well, this is will give you a better job. This is impossible. So if you no, you couldn't change the
The
society like that.
machines don't complain about dirt in the
The what?
street. Only people living there complain about dirt in the street.
Where?
Trucks don't complain about dirt in the street. It's only people who actually have to walk along the street who complain about the lack of street cleaners. I mean, there are areas in London which would be far better not to have any pavements and for it be forbidden for anyone to live there.
They go to the suburb in London. They are very poorly clean, it seems to me.
I'm sorry, but all I'm saying is that, in fact, by bringing people back into this, putting more people in centre city, you are, in fact, increasing the reservoir of the underpaid and badly employed. And it's convenient for the middle class,
You
that's all.
see the American situation and you say that. It's all. It's a constatation. You go in New York and you see the Bowery, you say, what poor people in the center of New York. They exist in all the conditions. And I prefer to be an idiot in a city than in a village, because the social control is less efficacious in a city. And the worst thing for me is to live in a village where everybody knows you and so on. I think the big chance you have to avoid provincialism with the meanings of everything that means, let's say, the poor political reflection and so on, is to participate at the life of the city.
Well, the thing is, did you say an idiot?
If you have a poor, let's say a poor man, a very poor man, it's preferable to be a poor man in the city than in a village. Because in a village, yes, you are. In a village, you depend on the city. You are the guy, no, because you drunk, so you don't work and so on. In the city, you could go drunk if you want to do it, or because you couldn't get a job and so on. But to get a place where nobody could show you and say, this is the sort of each and each.
I personally think the city has a lot. I'm not anti-city. I mean, I think the city has a lot of qualities. Although I do feel that that this is being whimsical, historical. I agree, but the village idiot was always looked after by the rest of the population of the village. The city idiot is first arrested, then found not to be drunk but loony, and locked up in an asylum. Well, there's a different element, and I believe, in fact, there are very real qualities of the city, but I do not find at this present moment in Western Europe any justification of increasing centre city population. And that was the question. Now, you've answered it. You think there is. I only put my rider on it, why I thought it was wrong, because I won't repeat it again. I explained why I thought it was wrong.
Cedric, it would not be interesting to see why cities have grown in the 19th century. And certainly they have grown in the form of suburbs, not because the workers wanted suburbs or green city, but because it was the only form to quieten this incredible explosiveness which the 19th century city generated. And in really 19th century, the city, which used to be a place of privilege, became a place
to get off the land.
Yes, but
Do
that's
you
not
think
what
that
they
if you
don't
stop people living in the center of the city,
I'm not
then
stopping.
you relax. If there were people living in the center of the city, do you think you'd stop the necessity for a lot of those low-paid jobs?
Yes.
How?
By, in fact, well, I'll give you an example. 1949, the population of the City of London, nighttime population of the city, square mile, was 180. It's now 4,000, thanks to Jamie Powell and Barton and the Barbican. Now, you could, in fact, between 1949 and 1976, got rid of those 180, apart from John Benjamin, who seems to have some particular link. And therefore, that area of the city could very well, and this is a square mile, that was the nighttime population, could at night drop the shutters all the way around, washed itself, cleaned itself, all automatically, not had a single policeman, a single ambulance, a single car crash, a single burglary, and opened itself up in the morning for the people arriving quite happily over London Bridge from Croydon. Now we have 4,000 people in Barbican every night.
I think it's very romantic to think that you could actually close it down and clean it just
Why?
like that.
Why? There are several streets that do.
There'd be people who try to get it because they'd like to be there.
Right, mate, one thing I take advantage of in the city is the rule of law. I'd close it down and wouldn't let people in, no question.
Then you'd have to employ
With
a
big
very
gates.
well-paid policeman to do it.
No. I mean, how often do you wander down Threadneedle Street at midnight, whistling about the... Yeah, well, you're an expensive item on my ratepayer, having to have a pavement and having it policed for you. And if you take a dog, I've got to clear his droppings as well.
But the traffic warden in car is diseased. And you see them all around. These people do nothing but control the order. And it is like a tendency which seems to general.
What is that? Sorry, what is
There's
this?
a traffic warden and the policing area, which is the result of this pattern that we have.
It's the result of the fact that people are living there, yes.
So he's not only there, because there is an order which really takes more ground than it should. There is kind of a complete control of any ground of life.
No, it doesn't
It's
make...
really the ultimate of what you suppose. To build a wall around the city, to build a wall around the green belts, to build a wall around the zones, anyhow. And that's really what he's getting at, the zoning, which is wrong.
Well, my wall was a nighttime wall while the thing washed itself. Very high power hoses, which is not flat on the floor. But there were 140. Look, 10 years ago there were 180 there. There were 4,500. You couldn't do it with 4,500. I agree. There were 180. It wasn't people saying they wanted to come back. It was the City of London Corporation who built Barbican. There was no great demand because there was no previous population. They hadn't been bombed out. There wasn't a great population saying we want to go back to our homes now the war's over. The population before the war was 460. It was 180 after the war. It's now 4,500, rising to 5. That is architects thinking that it's good to mix people in, bring them back. So you do have a lot of policemen around the Barbican. There was never a single policeman there before the war because it was a lot of old warehouses.
But there are fantastic other examples that if you want to...
Well, that's a very big one, isn't it?
I went to Stonehenge, and in midnight, around Stonehenge, there was an enormous wall of barbed wire, and lights which lit the barbed wire, but the stones in the middle were not lit. And you had 3 enormous police vans on the car.
We know why that
That's
was.
ultimate control. That's the kind of idea you seem to get.
But no, you know why that was? On the contrary, that's because of loonies like you who want to keep relics. And because you have the blessed DOE behind you and they worry about liching and they worry about the stones being carved on and pushed over, the poor old bloody police have to come out because the loonies with their wigwams want to celebrate the rising of the sun. I'm all for letting Stonehenge be knocked down tomorrow by them. But not the DOE, not the people who want the relics built. Not only the ones we've got preserved, before built.
To the police, human beings are potential criminals.
Oh, don't be so wet.
It becomes purely power.
So you mean policemen are sort of monsters, are they? When they get home.
Police.
Aye, that's a bit loony.
It's a matter of power. Who goes on is getting more and more power.
Well, who's got the power? Do you think the policemen wanted to sit in those conservationists forced by people like you to save our heritage.
And the loonies who want to camp there as well.
No, because the loonies want to camp there. As far as I'm concerned, they camp there, they can aerosol Stonehenge, they can try and push the bits over, they can carve their names on. But oh no, not the Royal Fine Arts Commission, not the DOE, not a large section of the AA. Oh no, we must keep this. This is part of Britain's heritage. So they say, how do we keep it? Well, we can't build a brick wall round, so we'll bring in our equivalent of a brick wall, who we pay rates for, and who everyone hates, and we'll put them in uniform so they hate them. We'll call them police and sit them in their buses all night to preserve our national heritage. I mean, that's the nonsense we're talking about.
Well, Cedric, part of the thing that you're talking about, the idea of the city washing itself at night is very curious. I mean, it's a beautiful machine image, but when you start thinking about it, it's the center, the great catalyst center, completely automated without a person there, cleaning itself. And what's it doing? What's its use? And what's its for? And who owns it? And
well, I mean, now this is a good one to ask me there. I don't like who owns the City of London. What I'm saying is that a street is only horrific and sort of intimidating and monstrous, whoever owns it, whether it's Westminster or Angus Ogilvy, when one person is allowed to walk down the street. When there's no one there, no one could possibly describe it as empty. It's only because John Benjamin went whistling round the streets, saying, oh, I mean, this is nonsense. Look, the coal mine's pretty empty when the people are out of it. Who owns that?
It's not enough for the city.
If you allow
Make the city out of it. Why not?
If you allow people to live in a centre, you slice up the ownership into tiny pieces so that no monster developer can do anything particular with the centre.
Facts are right. Who owns Barbican? The City of London.
Well, that's the thing. It's still ridiculous. If everyone owns a little bit of the city and they all live in the centre, then
What would they do?
What
What would they do? They go to Croydon to work for ITT.
Well, what I think you would like is for very ITT to own the centre.
Well, I really do think, and I mustn't take any more time, if we're going to talk about ownership, both of land and what many in my party used to call the powers and the rising heights of the economy, that's something quite different, and we probably wouldn't disagree. It's very extraordinary, in fact, that I find most of the architectural population against the Community Land Bill, which in fact puts the ownership and the profit of land back in the hands of the state. Well, yeah, but so, I mean, just watch it, mate. So we're not talking about that. I mean, it'll give Peter cause for yawning. In fact, it's almost making me yawn. We were talking about actual physical planning before we got on to artifactual form making, which was going to be the next question, but I'll give someone else a chance now.
Well, I've got a question since connects with Cedric's, which is, I was curious as to whether you thought the image that you're trying to create is independent of ideology. That was the message that I was getting. Now it's completely destroyed how I got that question. But I got this idea that somehow you could carry an image from Port Grimaud and place it in the centre of Brussels. And Port Grimaud, which is property speculation, and you could somehow carry it into social housing in the centre of Brussels without any change, somehow the image was totally independent of ideology. And I was just curious about that, whether that was a conscious point of your program. Do you understand?
Yes. But, in fact, when we use the image of Paul Grimaud, we change it a bit, because the apartments are smaller inside for social housing. So we change it. And we try to build it cheaper than they've done it Paul Grimaud. That is quite difficult to do because they have done it very well. And the only thing we believe, I'm sorry to be again the word of Cedric Price, but when we try to give place for the people in the city, because in fact if you listen to the people, they do not leave the city because they want to go in the country. Very often they leave the city because the freeway is there, or because there is too much noise, or because there is a lot of things because you leave the city, but very often they push you out of the city. Not the very rich people, because they could build some new villa and so on in the country, and they're very happy there behind that tree and so on. But if you look at you were speaking about Barbican. It's a very awful scheme. I don't plea for Barbican. I say it's really awful. I don't want to live there, but I say there is some other possibilities to build apartments in a city, and Barbican is not the good scheme. We have to do it because we have to know, and this is an error. We must try not to repeat it. And in Brussels, we repeat errors since the 30s, the same building since the 30s and so on. And when we look at the people, well, they say we prefer, we saw Paul Grimaud, but I could show you a bit of old Brussels, something like that. And they say we prefer that. If you could give us social housing with this kind of facade, we would like it. And we say, why not? Because you could do it at the same price, because technical, color, and so on, you could do it. And we are doing it, in fact, in a small operation in the center of Brussels. It's called La Marolles. It's a very well-known place in Brussels. It's one of the poorest districts of Brussels in the center. And it's a very funny place because it's a place since the 18th or 17th centuries. The strangers arriving in Brussels, poor strangers, were going in this small place in the center. And then just stay there a few months, a few years, and they start to group themselves, let's say the Spanish, and after that the Italians, and today the Moroccans, live in this borough. And they arrive from their country alone. They are just a piece, each is alone. And living in this borough, they start, and we try to not to force them, but to encourage them to make a groupment of people, to be stronger. And so you have now in the Labour Party, you have representation of the Spanish worker in Brussels, because they group themselves. Because if you do not group themselves, yourself in society, they pick you up. So in this borough of the center, people go on, stay a few years, and after that, they go other. Some Belgian people stay all their life in this part of the center of the city. Look, it's a funny place of the city because people stay and also people go and go further. And we win a battle because they want to destroy everything. They say this old houses, this strangers, this old Belgian, and we will put new offices block because the land is very good to put building on that place. And people fight, say we want to stay in the city because we love to live in the city. We want to have street for our children with no car, but we want to stay there. And they want to stay there for a lot of facilities because they have, let's say, hospitals, they have a lot of things that if you live in the country you could not have. And they win the battle against the city. And now today we are rebuilding this place. We keep half of the old building with rehabilitation inside, destroying, let's say, 100 houses, but we do it quite slowly. We take two of them, we destroy it, and we rebuild. And making this operation, we are aware now that the imaginations concerning architecture, we found it working in this kind of place of the city. Not with the rich people, because they have this scheme. They repeat them simply, goodly, with a good Nobel architect, but they repeat the scheme. In this part of Brussels, the people say, well, our street is quite black because we have few sun, because the building is too high. And we say, well, would you try to have a painting or ceramic in trompe-l'œil with a blue sky in the bottom of the house? And they say yes, and we
we have done it. In fact, the street is more clearer now because the top of the building, and we put a cornice a little bit lower and a roof, so the street look clearer. And if you propose this kind of architecture to the rich borough of Brussels, they say we'll go to the hell, we want marble and stone and so on. And this is a small details. And we have also, we learned that in this kind of district, if you put building with, let's say, grass around, what happens? People take their junks and they put them on the grass. If you plant trees, small trees, the small children take the trees to eat you. So we find that keeping the streets and keeping the streets that existing, the big one, inside the block, and renovating by small phases, this was a good way to do it in this kind of place. And to answer to your question, doing this method, we say, why not the style of Paul Grimaud? Because people love it. They don't love the modern style with all this block and concrete and so on. So say, we will give you a Paul Grimaud. This is free for us. This is the same price. A concrete facade or a Paul Grimaud facade. You want Paul Grimaud? We'll put you Paul Grimaud. We don't have any moralistic approach. If people wanted to have a Swiss facade, maybe we give them Swiss facade, if it is possible to do it economically. Paul Grimaud was a good example because it's very economic. It's why I show this picture. If you take, I don't know, the Tudor style, this will be very expensive probably because we have to make a lot of nice brick works and so on. So my answer is why not Paul Grimaud if we could do it. Anyway, just a small, anyway, the face of Brussels as a beautiful face is lost forever. So let's go in the cow. Not the cow of the promoters are building tower everywhere, but let's go in a aesthetic cow, but in organic planning, putting people and green space and so on in the city, conserving the street and so on. So that means the aesthetic question for us is not important, but we deal with it, because if not, other cares of it. But in fact, the aesthetic question is not a problem. It's why I say Paul Grimaud or something else.
But why Paul Grimaud?
Because Paul Grimaud is more pleasant.
But was Brussels not the
Yes, it was, but it's you have a very good example of architecture in Brussels. You call it the Viennese architecture, because when they built this kind of houses at the beginning of the 19th century, the Austrian people were ruling that. It's very simple architecture, so a flat facade with a whitewash on it. So, but people don't like it too much because it's too simple, you know. So again, Paul Grimaud is the best with his red thing.
But like most architects, think that this machine, you think you know what they like this time. I don't know how many people have asked somebody in Forster in the bargain, and if you give them a decent wage for the job, they gave them all the content of capitalist society, the car, would they still live in the bargain? Then you can start asking the question whether they should see like the centre of the city, but people seem so sure that everybody wants this or everybody wants that. No, yet I'm actually finding what people want to live in.
Yes, so you could say that. The only thing I could answer to you is that I am working in a kind of a group. You could have any kind of theory. You could develop the one by Cedric Price and to make a plaidoyer for other kind of city. But the problem is to be efficacious. And then I am working in a group, and in that group we believe that the power of the people, it is in the city. So as an architect, I am doing everything I could to go in that way. So I could go with you, but I am not sparing your point of view. So if you are with some people, try to make it and try to go with your point of view. But if you are alone, you could tell me anything you want. Actually, we are in a group fighting against the right wing of Catholic political force in Brussels. We are fighting against them, and we are fighting with some success. This we could see it and we could appreciate it. So
that is our action. You could appreciate it or not as done Cedric Price, but the only thing we are doing it, and we are doing it sincerely, I think. We are not making it to have affair because we don't believe in it. Maybe we are wrong, Cedric. Maybe we are wrong, but we think we are not wrong and we are fighting for it. Well,
I know that you're fighting. And in fact, that first question was the one thing that I feel may be wrong, not your intentions. And in fact, I think the whole business of transferring, sort of pastiche is an interesting one, because whereas Grimo was brought about through market forces by those rich enough to be able to be measured by capitalist market forces. It is, I think the situation, particularly in relation to housing, is difficult, because the market forces that control those people who are short of houses are the market forces that apply to the cost of food and transport, and doesn't even get to the level of market forces as to what sort of house. So the Grimo thing, is, I think it was a good example to do because it is an unsympathetic, or I hope it's unsympathetic reason that caused it to most of us here. And in fact, another thing just in support of Grimo, on a point, you said it was cheap construction, but they charged a lot. In fact, why they charged, they didn't make much profit, because I did a study of Grimo when I was trying to do a public authority housing marina down the Thames on a rubbish tip called Two-Tree Island. The Grimo costs were in fact in the reclamation and the piling, although there isn't much of a tide there, if any. So in fact, it was a little tighter an equation, but that's by the way. But if we come back to the pastiche, is it fair to speak with you about that tower, or was that students at the school who did it? The tower in front of the church?
No, you could speak to me.
It was interesting that you said at the bottom, this part came out of Corp and the New York Five. Well, the joke about the New York Five is that they, in a way, are pastiche purveyors, rather like you can describe a building as if designed by Walt Disney. But in fact, we all know what the building would look like. It might be any one of 1,000 things, depending on the situation. So it's funny that they have already got into that sort of level of easy description. But what interested me about that building was the tower itself was I don't know whether it was influenced by, but it's extremely like Charles Colbert's New Orleans Tower of about 15 years ago, which was never built. The actual tower and the triangular supports and the free arrangement inside. And then you've got that funny bit at the bottom, which you said, is New York Five. Now, and it's pastiche. What was the intention, coming back to the point made earlier, that there was no way of asking, and no reason of asking, and no way of asking people who might, even if it's an imaginary scheme, there's no way of asking people who might occupy a multi-floor tower as to whether they would like the basement a la New York Five and an abortion from a bad dream by Corp. But why was that chosen so obviously as a style? Was it done by students? Do you know why, though? It just interests me why they did that extraordinary thing.
In fact,
I'm just interested.
No, the reason is quite simple. This was done by two young students coming in the school of Lacan from another school, because they failed another school. And we give them this quite difficult problem to put apartments on this side in front of the church. And starting the project, they come one day with a tower. And we say, why a tower? This is silly in front of an old church. And I said, but if you want to do it with a cultural background. And we say, well, read the Five Architects and try to read about modern movement. And that they start reading books and choosing a lot of books that we done to them. But doing so, they improve their projects. And
I believe the result that I think is a good result for so young students, how this tower with the plants free from the floor. I think it's what a very good experience for the student, for us, but as a militant, I think, urban struggle, I don't approve the scheme. But as a member, director of the archive, I say, bravo, man, I will publish your tower because it's very nice. So I have to add, you see, and...
Maurice, can I do a bit of interpretive thinking on this, sort of, which revolves around these questions, because having sort of watched you, sometimes in your home territory, sometimes from a distance, it strikes me that you are caught in the slipstream of having to operate, as would, say, in somewhere like London, about 3 or 6 different people. That on the one hand, you're sort of carrying out a sort of advocacy operation. On the other hand, you're the one cheerful teacher in a school that has the usual problems between the old guard and the young guard. You're sort of encouraging along a young group of ex-students who are now beginning to teach. But then you organize these exhibitions that travel further and further and further. You've got all these balls in the air. I sense that you are a sort of portmanteau man, and maybe you have to face up that tower, which probably a lot of us think, oh, you know, don't really like to sort of be too nasty about it, because we think, well, you know, all power to their elbow, but hope to Christ they do it better next time. At the same time, I'm fascinated by the paradox, coming to an earlier question that must occur to you, which is your obvious, not only historical involvement with, but obviously romantic love for the Art Nouveau and all that, which of course was high bourgeoisie, was perhaps politically totally indefensible. The nouveau riche of Brussels trying to create for their newly made capital, as I think you explained, their newly made national capital, a high style, a high bourgeois rich style, which must at certain times be slightly embarrassing at the political, abstractly political level. And yet, on the other hand, your own personal taste, I suspect, in the final analysis, would neither appeal to Leo Krier nor to Cedric Price, who are actually rather more similar than they like to pretend. From where I'm sitting, but that's by the way. In the sense that you are a romantic, I think that actually when the chips are down from things, this is really rather naughty, because I have seen things on your drawing board at various times. You're more of a aesthetic romantic than you would care to present yourself as, and therefore certainly you know, the Frankfurt Mire is not for you, and certainly people's housing is not for you, and I would suspect high rationalism is not for you, nor is creative city for you. So, and for Christ's sake, you know, you're despite your activity as the hustler and the portmanteau man and all the rest, when the chips are down, you are you, and you are still an architect. You know, and you still have your own gut reactions. And my hunch is that you're probably closer to Pantrageddis over there when it comes down to actual taste. And I seem to remember you were on Arcasanti or something. Don't hope it's not below the belt to draw these things out of the bag, because they are relevant. I think it's easy for us to sit here and take our very pre-arranged London positions. The reason for me asking you to come to this thing was because I think the curious confluence of the 3 activities that you were playing, maybe because Brussels is as yet a smaller architectural world than London, or New York, or Milan, let's say. But because at this moment it is you, the victim of all these balls, it presents a very interesting situation of of the paradox, between the Art Nouveau. And another question, that I'd like to ask is your observation of some of the people whose work you are now exhibiting, such as Pomp, was, I don't know, you tell us, was Pomp a socialist? Was he making a fundamental distancing of his position and his architecture, which is more Puritan, which is more edgy than some of the sort of late Art Nouveau? Was somebody like de Koning more than a kind of slightly informed engineer type? Was he taking a political stand? We don't know much about the Belgian scene. I mean, everybody is told that Leussard was a certain kind of political person, or Hannes Meyer was a certain kind of political person. That's highly documented. The Belgian scene is more mysterious. And I think another exciting thing, what you've done in the last few years, is to dig out these weirdo characters, some of whom are still alive in their bath chairs or small towns on the way to Antwerp or something, who have done very inventive work. Was there a political connection with that work?
No, not at all.
No. So, when you wear your archive hat, you say, well, to hell with his politics, but he was an interesting guy.
No. When we are preparing exhibition, the first thing we are thinking about is the printing of the catalog, and the way we are doing it is that will be interesting for us financially, because if we do a catalog of 200 pages and we don't sell it, we just close the door. And when we are making exhibitions about Pomp, de Koning, or even Sauvage in France, who are building a man, we collect the photograph we like, we collect the drawing we like. We hide a lot of drawing. You will never see a drawing of Sauvage or Pomp or de Koning or Bourgeois. We are building up people because we cheat with the history. This is natural. This is nothing. Everybody cheats with history. Because we have very few money, we have to cheat more than the other, because our catalog must be more selective with the just color plate we need. And we have Pomp is a liberal petit bourgeois personage, not very funny, but we have made him a very old famous architect. Well, that's the way you build people.
So you're a man,
This whole connection between your political ideas and your sort of projects that you're showing is almost definite, isn't it? You just take, because in fact both ideas are acceptable separately. When put together in such a kind of bland way, they do become incredibly, I think Paul Remo is incredibly decadent in terms of modern architecture. It's the suspicion when you put your political aims together with the sort of buildings you wish to make in Brussels is, if not a sort of nationalist idea, it seems to me to be incredibly sort of, you're almost trying to say we've been defeated by everything. Where it's going to just be straight down the line decadent about it. It seems to be, because it's not preservation. You're not being preservationist, are you? You're trying to be some sort of Belgian socialist architect. You're setting up a sort of structural thing to do with class and so on. You want to make that sort of traditional, that's a niche thing.
You could say that, maybe it's true again, but when we are dealing to have better processes of democratization in decision of city planning, this is when I have my ARAU, or when I am a member of, let's say, the Communist Party, my aim is to have this kind of democratization. And if you explain to the people in a group like ARAU as we are speaking, if you speak only, if you never show plan or picture, people get bored. They don't listen to you anymore. So we need the image. This is a fact. And I say, I'm an architect. I will deliver image to the people. And let's say, as we could say, a thinker in a left group, I would deliver the image that seems to me the most appropriate to go with the political message. This is all. This is the choice of Paul Grimaud and so on. In fact, it's my personal taste, as was saying Peter Cook, as I am growing older and older, as all of us, I prefer the neoclassical style. I suppose Greer is before me because he preferred it because. But I think, because I suppose older men prefer the classical because it's you deal with proportion, and when you are young you prefer something else maybe. I am not sure of that, but I know that my taste is going where the more classical architecture, and I don't like too much, I must apologize, modern architecture, except people as in the States, I love very much Californian architects. Schindler is people that I admire very much because I prefer maybe the minor architect to the very well-known one. By example, I prefer Schindler to Wright, or maybe, let's say, this is ridiculous, but let's say Pompe to Le Corbusier. The answer is very simple, because when you deal with minor architects, you know them well, because you don't have the screen of the celebrity. So Le Corbusier or Wright still are some kind of monument to me. I could not grasp them, you know. But dealing with Pompe, I understand why he have done this kind of building at that time and so on. So I could appreciate it very much. And one of the books I appreciated the much in my life was a book made by the American historian, the 5 Californian architects, on Maybeck, Schindler, and the other one. Because this book was remarkably done, because she speaks about the life of this architect, and this was kind of revelation for me. And this answer to the question of Peter Cook, again, my taste. And I must say that I love Paul Grimaud. I think it's really well done. And Spoeri is
I wasn't impressed. It was just, the best thing about it was that there weren't any cars. It was the only kind of...
But how do you decide that your preferences are more democratic than any other people?
I don't say that, I never say that.
Well, you do, in the sense that you present a neoclassical image as the one that people are better or more inclined to identify.
Oh, yes. We could say that because when...
How do you know?
Because when we offer alternative scheme, you know, actually the only scheme offered to the population in Brussels, by example, in the way of social housing, is small barbican, 100 of small barbican. Is the only way the architect or the power give to them. They say, well, this is that or nothing. We say there is something else, and we offer different alternatives. As you have seen on the scheme on the barracks, we have made a modern, let's say, scheme. This modern, a modernistic scheme, and one on the based on fleur facade and so on. And we deliver the different scheme to the press. And the thing we saw, because people write to the newspaper and so on, we saw that people prefer the Paul Grimaud or the Honfleur style. We say we are not moralistic people. If they prefer that, we will try to give them that. It's only a question of facade. Why to fight for a facade? We are fighting for apartments. And this is all.
I think there is something important in that it has destroyed the image, which used to go that progress was in architecture also meant progress socially, and nobody believes that anymore. But that was seen in housing, public housing scheme. And now, but I think there is danger to say that Paul Grimaud is a model for a socialist society. I think it's important now because people like it. But if you look at it, really, I think what will be discussed is the way it is produced. And if one produces Paul Grimaud in the fabric, I think it's disaster. It's just a cheat, it's an eyewash. But it's the way, it's really society which built the kind of architecture that Paul Grimaud tries to imitate, which I think is important as a model of production. Absolutely. And not so much the image of it.
But the only thing we get from... listen, Paul Grimaud is a commercial success, you must admit that. A lot of people...
But it's built to last for 60 years.
Yeah, no, well, anyway, it's a commercial success. A lot of people, maybe wealthy people going there, love it. I must say that. If you compare, you could compare other schemes. If Port Grimaud upset you, you could take another thing. You could take the station of Avoriaz in France, made by a group of architects that made a building with a tile. You know this Avoriaz, huh? This is in Switzerland or maybe in France, I'm not sure. But they are building in the mountains with a very strange form covered with black tiles. And you have another station made by Breuer, you know, the architect Breuer, with a block and so on. If you question people simply a question of taste, they all prefer the scheme of not Breuer but the other one, because it's more picturesque and so on. The cost of the book is identical.